Welcome to the History and Heritage podcast with me, Liam Blake. Join me as we uncover hidden stories and insights that shaped our world. From mysteries to legacies, join us on this journey through time. Molasses waist deep covered the street and swirled and bubbled above the wreckage. Here and there struggled a form. Whether it was animal or human being was impossible to tell. Only an upheaval, a thrashing about in the sticky mess, showed where any life was. So that was a quote from the Boston Post, dated January 16, 1919. It was in relation to one of the strangest deadly disasters in American history, probably in world history. The Great Molasses Flood of 1919. So, what exactly was it? And what's kind of the context and background? And also, what are the implications even up until today? Great Molasses Flood of 1919, as it became known, was an event in Boston's North End. It was rooted in corporate negligence, exploitation, and a lack of regulatory oversight, as we'll see later on. It's a story of when a seemingly harmless substance turned into a destructive force that genuinely changed both Boston and America forever, particularly in regards to its approaches for safety and building standards. So, I have said molasses quite a bit, but what exactly is molasses? Molasses is a thick syrup, and it was a byproduct of the sugar refining process, and it was used as a common sweetener in America at the time. Now it is more often used in animal food. In the early 20th century, it became a key industrial commodity for producing industrial alcohol, which isn't actually like drinking alcohol. It's a crucial ingredient in munitions and explosives, which, given that it's 1919, shortly after the war, that is very important. The onset of World War I created a massive demand for molasses, leading to a boom in production and storage. Again, as I said, very important, because if you don't have places to store it, where do you store it? You build places to store it, and that's what they did. They built a tank in the north end of Boston. But molasses was also a central commodity in the triangular trade, connecting the Caribbean, New England, and Africa. It was shipped from the Caribbean to New England, where it was distilled into rum, which was then traded for slaves in West Africa, who then worked on the sugar plantations, and then the triangle continued. Enter, stage left, the company at the centre of this whole debacle. The United States Industrial Alcohol Company, also known as USIA, and its subsidiary, Purity Distilling Company, were the key players. The USIA profited immensely by producing industrial alcohol for munitions, supplying both all of the Allied governments and, more particularly, the US. Purity Distilling operated the plant in Boston and owned the ill-fated storage tank. Why was it ill-fated, you may ask? I shall tell you now. But first, a little bit about the tank. The tank, located at 529 Commercial Street in Boston's North End, was a massive structure built in 1915. So by the time of the disaster, which I keep saying disaster, you'll get it in a minute, it was 4 years old. It was 50 feet tall, 90 feet in diameter, and could hold 2.3 to 2.5 million gallons of molasses. Construction was rushed with minimal engineering oversight and no pre-usage testing at all. Arthur P. Gell, Purity's Distilling's treasurer, with no architectural or engineering experience at all, was in charge of the project, which, it just shows so much negligence. It's shocking. He was promised a promotion if he could complete the project before the end of 1915. That's just begging to cut corners. Anyway, the tank was built with curved steel plates joined by rivets, but the steel was thinner than even specified in the original plans. The original plans were drawn to cut corners, so when you're making steel thinner than that even, no wonder sure the Great Molasses Flood happened. A modern study found that the steel was actually half as thick as it should have been for a tank of that size. Now, in fairness to the people back in 1919, they wouldn't have had this study, so they mightn't have actually known. The tank was classified as a receptacle and not a building, which was really, really important, because if it was a building, it would have had to apply standard building codes and inspections, which it didn't. The company only needed a building permit for the concrete foundation and not the actual tank itself. This is, again, there's so much foreshadowing, it's crazy. But anyways, the tank leaked from the moment it was built, with the company making insufficient attempts at repairs, including painting it brown to hide the stains. So it wasn't like, oh yeah, we'll fix the tank. It was, no, we'll paint it brown so you don't see that the tank is broken. Like, so much stuff that, again, I suppose hindsight is 2020 and all that, but like, there's so much stuff in this. A USIA employee noticed molasses bleeding through the joints in the metal as soon as it was built, but his concerns were dismissed by his superiors, including Mr. Gell, who, in case you haven't realised by now, doesn't come out well out of it. And then, obviously, the disaster was 4 years after the initial thing, so by that time, metal fatigue from the repeated filling and emptying caused stress and cracks around the poorly placed rivets. And kind of like freeze-thaw action, if you know what that is, every time that the steel flexed, the cracks grew. A vent which was meant to release the gases from fermentation process was closed due to the winter weather. It was really, really cold there. I'll get to that in literally a second. But this trapped the internal pressure inside. Locals noticed the tank made long, thunderous groans, which was like, you know the pre-earthquake tremors that go on? It's kind of like that, and it's so chilling when you realise what happened afterwards. So, the day of the disaster itself was January 15th, 1919. The day began with a January thaw, a sudden temperature rise from 2 degrees Fahrenheit to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which is roughly minus 17 degrees Celsius to about 4 degrees Celsius. A new shipment of warm molasses from the Caribbean was being pumped into the tank at the very time of the accident, which mixed with the cold molasses already inside. And this was part of the trigger because the molasses inside, being colder, mixed with the warmer molasses and produced gases, and that added to the internal air pressure and basically turned it into a bomb. Speaking of bombs, around 12:30 p.m, the tank failed catastrophically and just boom, the whole thing just exploded. A wave of molasses 25 feet high and 160 feet wide rushed through the streets at an estimated 35 miles per hour. And I'm apologising now. Again, as you might have noticed, I was meant to record this yesterday and I forgot to change back the measurements from American to European measurements, but you can look that up yourself. The molasses, 40% heavier than water, weighed about 26 million pounds, which is a couple of thousand pounds. The deluge struck with immense force, causing widespread destruction. Buildings collapsed, infrastructure was destroyed, and people were caught in the deadly wave. As one source said at the time, anyone caught out in the open stood virtually no chance as the deluge struck them full on, either asphyxiating them or crushing them against buildings, vehicles, or locomotives. The foundation of the fire station locally buckled and trapped several men in the basement. So I suppose the death toll from the disaster. The death toll was 21, including 2 10-year-old children who frequently went to the base of the tank to collect leaking molasses. Many of the victims were Italian immigrants and Irish city workers. A woman in her 60s was killed when her home was demolished, and she was an important woman in the community. Around 150 people, so that's 171 total, but 150 people were injured, many severely. This is the mad thing. As I said, it was 40% heavier than water, molasses was, and it was actually like really sticky, so it made it very difficult to escape, because every time you moved, it would kind of harden and suck you in further. The molasses also hardened as the temperature dropped, further complicating any rescue efforts. Horses that went in to help with the efforts, and some that were owned by the community, were shot to relieve them of their suffering rather than trying to pull them out of these sticky molasses. The molasses waves broke windows 15 feet above the street. That's how high the flood went. 15 feet, that's in or around 5 meters. The elevated train tracks nearby were twisted by the force of the wave, and the train was nearly derailed. So you may wonder what happened in the immediate aftermath. Well, as far as we know, The scene was chaotic, with people and animals struggling in the thick, sticky molasses. I'm going to give you an extended quote now to the quote I opened with. Molasses waist deep covered the street and swirled and bubbled about the wreckage. Here and there struggled a form. Whether it was animal or human being was impossible to tell. Only an upheaval, a thrashing about in the sticky mass, showed where any life was. Horses died like so many flies on sticky paper. The more they struggled, the deeper in the mess they were ensnared. Human beings, men and women, suffered likewise. So that just gives you a real sense of just how awful and, like, I hate to use the pun, it was a very sticky end, but it was a very sticky end. Rescue efforts began almost immediately, with over 100 sailors from the USS Nantucket, which happened to be docked nearby, assisting. The sticky molasses, as I've already mentioned, made rescues very difficult because of the nature of getting stuck in it. Initial cleanup efforts were slow and difficult due to the molasses viscosity, which means how thick it was, and its stickiness in general. Firefighters eventually had to use salt water from Boston Harbor to wash away the molasses. Speculation initially focused on a bomb attack by anarchists due to the large Italian immigrant population in the North End. And why is this? It is because the anarchist movement from the Italians had its de facto headquarters in Boston's North End itself. Anarchists had been responsible for assassinations and bombings in both Europe and America in and around this time, obviously, especially with the war going on and all that kind of thing. The USIA attempted to blame the disaster on sabotage, claiming that anarchists planted a bomb. However, investigations revealed no evidence of a blast wave at all, disproving the sabotage theory. Broken windows, it was proven later, were caused by the molasses wave, not an explosion. Attention then turned, unfortunately for Mr. Gell and the USIA, to the tank's structural integrity. Was there a legal battle or a court case? Of course there was a legal battle of court case, there always is. The biggest one was Doar versus USIA, or United States Industrial Alcohol. It was a class action lawsuit, and it became one of the largest and longest class action lawsuits in American history at the time. Dudley H. Doar was the man who gave his name to the Doar part of the lawsuit. The case involved the testimonies of nearly 1,000 witnesses and over 1,500 exhibits, documented in a 25,000-page transcript. The defense from USIA, as we have already heard that they came out with nearly straight away, were that anarchists were responsible for the disaster. This defense, again, was ultimately rejected due to the lack of evidence of an explosion. After a lengthy legal battle that took about up until 1925, USIA was found liable for the disaster due to the tank's structural weakness. Presiding auditor Hugh Ogden ruled that the USIA and Purity Distilling were to blame for the disaster. Ogden criticised the company for installing the large tank in a busy neighbourhood without verifying its safety and ignoring evidence that construction happened to be faulty. USIA was ordered to pay damages of approximately $628,000, which is about $1.5 million in 1920s money, or approximately $15 million today. The families of those who died instantly were awarded around $6,000 each, and $7,500 for those who suffered before their death. The disaster disproportionately affected working class and immigrant communities in the North End, particularly Italian and Irish immigrants. And again, because they were immigrants, these communities unfortunately lacked political power and influence, because if they had that, they could have easily said, no, we don't want this tank, and kicked up a fuss, and it would have probably been overturned. Many of those killed or injured were working class immigrant labourers or delivery workers. The event highlighted the lack of worker safety regulations and exploitation of the working class at the time, and it brought serious focus to the dangerous conditions that workers faced in early 20th century industrial settings. The disaster, in case you haven't made the link yourself, is kind of linked now to the ongoing struggle for fair wages and safe working conditions. The Great Molasses Flood of 1919 led to significant changes in building regulations and constructions and safety practices. Boston City began requiring all architectural plans to be submitted with calculations and drawings stamped with the seal of a certified engineer, and other major cities shortly after followed suit, leading to nationwide construction safety reform. This effectively ended the era of unregulated large-scale construction and do-it-yourself engineering. The Molasses flood is considered a pivotal event that did for the US construction standards what the Coconut Grove fire did for fire codes. The Molasses flood effectively ended the New England molasses trade. USIA's reputation was severely damaged, and it eventually kind of disappeared into obscurity through mergers. Funny enough, it also spurred a larger conversation on the relationship between business and government then at that point began to have more influence over how businesses operate to avoid this sort of frankly embarrassing disaster from happening again. An urban legend at the time arose that a faint smell of molasses could still be detected in Boston during hot summer days, even up as far as the 1930s. The site of the disaster is now a youth baseball diamond with a small plaque commemorating the event. The disaster serves as a reminder of how quickly a seemingly harmless substance can become deadly when handled irresponsibly. It is a case study in discussions about corporate responsibility, workers' rights, and environmental regulation. The parallels between the molasses flood and other industrial disasters, such as the Flint water crisis, demonstrate the ongoing issues of environmental racism, where people are like, oh, we don't care whether we put stuff there. Kind of like NIMBYism, I guess. Because, it doesn't affect me. It highlights the need for labour organising and collective action to fight for better working conditions and affordable housing. The global nature of companies and economics today could mean that workers are unknowingly contributing to the harm of others, including their co-workers in different parts of the world. Modern-day workers in many places continue to grapple with many of the same issues that existed in 1919, such as low pay, unsafe working conditions, and lack of political influence. The question remains, are we doing enough to prevent similar tragedies from occurring today? So what is your answer to that question? Are you inspired to look up more about the Great Molasses Flood of 1919? Are you inspired to maybe even visit that youth baseball field where it happened? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Liam Blake Podcaster. Until next time, History and Heritage Podcast friends, goodbye. Hey, just before you go, please like this podcast, rate it 5 stars if you can, and then also comment if you can, something nice or any advice you have, and share this with anyone you think might be interested in either history or heritage. And it's not just Irish focus, it's international focus as well. So, thank you.